This game is from day 2 of the quarterfinals. Hikaru Nakamura against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Day 1 went very well for the Frenchman. He won the first set. So in day 2, Hikaru Nakamura had to win the set to force a tiebreak. The day started very well for him. He won the first game, second game was drawn, and this is game 3. If Nakamura won, he would force that tiebreak. If Maxime won, then, well, he would potentially getting closer to going straight through to the semi-finals. So, Najdorf variation from Vachier-Lagrave. No big surprise. He has quite a limited repertoire, but of course he knows it extremely well. And Nakamura had clearly prepared something against this. Bishop d3. In fact, he'd played this in the first game. Now we can see one of the ideas of bishop d3 is that the e2 square is left open for that knight to retreat to, and then it bounces around to g3, looking at the f5 outpost. So this potentially could be upsetting for black, but, well, let's deal with this position. It's quite interesting. In the first game, Vachier-Lagrave played d5. Actually, this did not work out well. Nakamura had a lead in development, a nice initiative, and won that game pretty easily. I think the simplest way to play this for black is just to continue as normal with bishop e7. If f4, we can take. We'll stop the knight coming into f5, and then the knight comes to that beautiful e5 square. And I don't think black has any difficulties in this position at all. No doubt Hikaru would have found some way of playing this position to make it interesting. But anyway, I think black is fine. But instead, Maxime played g6 to cover the f5 square. Fair enough. But then white can kind of change tack. Bishop g5 from Hikaru. Good move. Bishop e7 breaks the pin, but now bishop h6, preventing black from castling. Knight g4, attacking that bishop, has to go away. Now black could just castle, but spying the knight on g3, Maxime obviously thought, okay, I can have some fun here, h5. Now, good move from Hikaru to counter this. Knight d5, excellent. He would like to take that bishop. So Maxime can't live with that knight, he exchanged it off. And the knight dropped back to b8. h3, pushing the knight, and c4. Knight d7. So we'll talk about this position in a second. So we can see that white has this very nice queenside pawn majority. Black has a nice kingside pawn majority. And normally that's where black wants to play. But it's tricky. It's not so easy. Let's see. Castles, rook c1. So that's a nice move. Looking at potentially breaking with c5. Sometimes white can even sacrifice a pawn in order to force that d-pawn on. Now, I think black has a fundamental choice in this position. Perhaps you'd like to have a think. How would you play with black in this position? I'll have a little slurp tea. You have a little think. Normally with this kind of structure, black wants to push on the king side. You've got a 4-3 majority. You want to advance it. But it's not simple with those bishops trained on the king side. Let's have a look. Now this did not happen, but let's just see. Why not? knight h5, bishop h6, and queen d2. White is very well coordinated here. And if black were to advance, say with f5, that does create a big hole behind those pawns. And there is, in that situation, real potential for sacking a pawn with c5, maybe d6, opening up that diagonal. Whoops, that was a misfire. That diagonal. It's problematic advancing like that. You can see that black is not as well coordinated. So let's come back here. So instead of that, Maxime decided, okay, I'm going to play on the queen side, a5. Now, Hikaru keeps those pawns together. Good decision. You want to keep covering c5. And then b6. So basically, Maxime is kind of stalling white for the moment, making sure that c5 isn't coming. But there is a drawback to playing b6, which Nakamura immediately put his finger on. He played bishop c2. Good move. So that bishop potentially can bounce around into the c6 square. It looks pretty nice. h4. The knight was pushed back. And now pawn takes pawn on b4, pawn takes pawn. And here, well, again, Maxime decided wasn't going to look at the king side. He's playing on the queen side. So what he's decided to do instead is break up white's pawns, because that d pawn is lacking protection just for a moment. Okay, interesting decision. That was taken. But now we can see that there is a problem for black. He would definitely like to take on d5. This did not happen, but let's see, why not? Because here white can play bishop takes g6, and then queen b3, pins, knight f6, and knight c3. So white is going to win the piece back with a crushing position. Those b pawns are too strong. The king is exposed. So you can see in this position, the problem is that these advances here have actually weakened black's king position. And although Vachier-Lagrave is playing on the queen side, in fact, those kingside pawn moves don't really fit in with that. This is the issue. Queen b8 played, and that b pawn was protected by the bishop. Knight b6. So if he can take there, then he'll have centre pawns. Then things could be interesting. But watch. Queen b3. Very nice. The queen is on a light square. And that's where white is playing. Now, I mentioned earlier that the b6 move weakened the c6 square. And there is potential for white to use that. For example, if e4, the bishop goes back to b1, and then that knight can hop in to the c6 square, and that is looking really lovely for white. That would just dominate black's pieces. Knight b takes d5, so Maxime has got that pawn back. But still, white is so well coordinated here, and bishop h6 is an excellent move. Exploiting that weakness on the king side with that pawn advance. The rook has to move. And now bishop c4. Those bishops looking wonderful. This is one of those games where it's a perfect example of the power of the two bishops just cutting across the board. Obviously, if the knight moves, then the bishop will capture on f7. And if the queen supports the knight, then, well, we can just push it away with rook d1. So Vachier-Lagrave decided, got to sack the exchange. And then he played rook a4, hitting the b pawn. So the bishop dropped back to d2. Actually, Nakamura can hold his position together very well here. There's no real danger. And I mean, the only difficulty is if these pawns somehow get to roll down the board, but getting the knights out of the way and kind of securing the position behind is not easy. You can see, well, this rook and the queen looking very good on an open file. King g7. That's necessary. I mean, you know, there's always the possibility to exchange queens, so good move. Now, excellent technique from Hikaru. Rook a1. If you're the exchange up and you get the opportunity to exchange rooks, then normally it's a very good idea. It just makes life so much simpler. And white is in control here. Knight c7. So he's looking to take this pawn. But queen takes h4. Yeah, that pawn was weak and it created weaknesses. And this is looking tremendous. So Nakamura going full on for the attack now. Piece is looking really good. Knight threatened on f6. So king g7. And excellent move, rook c1. So the big idea is, if that knight moves, then the rook is going to slam down on the 8th rank. So knight e6, rook c8, threatening two different checkmates actually. So after rook c1, the knight had to be protected. Queen b7. Knight g3, so that knight just covering a few squares, covering this one. Potentially could sacrifice on one of these squares to get through to the king as well. So that's just looking good. So all Nakamura's pieces looking really well placed. And this is just a very, very difficult position for black now. Difficult to advance those pawns. Knight cd5 played. b5, excellent move. If queen takes b5, then bishop h6 check, and knight f5. There we go, that knight proving its worth, finally. If pawn takes, then queen g5 forces mate next move. So b5 just played. Can't be taken. But it's nice to use it as a decoy like that. Knight g8. Bishop takes, knight takes. Knight e4, that knight flying into the position. Looking at d6, looking in this direction as well. Let's have a look. Knight f4 played. Tricky. Queen takes knight threatened. Knight e2 threatened. Well, white can deal with that easily. Hikaru played queen f6, check. King g8. And now, simple move, rook e1. Everything is still under control. One little trick there. If, instead of rook e1, if white thought, I can get a bit flashy and take the queen, yeah, there's knight e2 check. Knight forks all round. Okay, here we go. So rook e1 instead. Very sensible. And white holds all the trumps here. Black's king is actually really insecure. And yeah, there's potential to take here, or indeed knight g5 and get in on f7. Knight f5 at least covers d6, but queen d8 check. And b6, that pawn which looked like it was going to fall a few moves ago, it's always, offered as a little decoy. Actually now looks like it's going to win the game, protected by the queen on d8. Knight e6, queen f6. This is absolutely horrible now. And now it's time for the rook to enter the game. Rook c1. Let's just have a quick look what happens on queen b6. There's a really nice winning move. Knight g5. Attacking here and here. Let's get rid of that knight. Knight takes, rook check, and rook h8. So rook c1 just played, and d5. And now Hikaru finished with a flourish, rook c7. Nice little bit of calculation at the end. Knight takes queen check and b takes c7. That pawn is going all the way. Here Maxime resigned. If queen b1 check, taking the knight, you're thinking, oh my word, black's going to get a perpetual here. No, c8 covers the c1 square, and after the check, king g1, nope, no more checks, and then it's white's turn to have some fun. I really like that game because I think Hikaru somehow controlled the game very well. He twisted the opening in his favour, and he wasn't reckless in any way. Very nice, controlled, strategic game actually, and with a nice punch at the end. In fact, so that meant after this game that Hikaru forced the tiebreak. I mean, the tiebreak was kind of crazy. Maxime won the first game, Hikaru bounced back, won the second, and then in the Armageddon game, it was a draw. Actually, Nakamura chose the black pieces he only needed to draw, and well, he got through basically, but he was never in any real danger in that Armageddon game. So by the skin of his teeth, he got through, and we now have two fascinating semi-finals. We have Magnus Carlsen playing Jan Nepomniachtchi, and we have Hikaru Nakamura playing Wesley So, the All-American battle. Should be good.